Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by Circa Million and Circa Survivor. I am Jim Coventry, excited to be here today. Today's show, going to be analyzing ADP battles. Now, these ADP battles where I give you players at the same position who are being drafted in similar spots during fantasy football drafts. I'll give you the upside, the downside, and the bottom line for each player. Now, before we dive into today's show, let's hit a season-long player prop that we really like right now. We're using the RotoWire picks tool to break these down. Now, it's part of a RotoWire subscription, and honestly, it's really one of the sharpest edges you can have heading into the season. It will make you money if you are able to gamble. All right, let me open up the screen. Right now, we're going to talk some Christian McCaffrey this morning. Always a great day to talk Christian McCaffrey. And as you see on the screen, we have Christian McCaffrey's season-long touchdown numbers come up. Now, if you notice on the screen, you will see that there are three different books. Now, Underdog and Prize Picks, you kind of got to put those into a parlay. But if you want to straight bet this over 6.5 touchdowns, you could go to Bet Caesar and make a straight bet on that. You'll also see there's the beauty of the tool, because you see if you go over to FanDuel, it's 7.5 touchdowns. That's one touchdown difference. And that's where RotoWire helps make you money. If you have access to shop at multiple sites, then you see right now, this gives you a position to get better odds. And realistically, that is the big difference sometimes between winning and losing. So McCaffrey over 6.5. Why do I like this so much? Well, first of all, 2022 and 2023. Now, we'll talk about last year in a minute. He had with the 49ers, 27 games, 31 touchdowns. He was more than a touchdown per game. Now, last year, 2024, we know McCaffrey only played 4 games. He was never right. Came back from that Achilles injury. You could tell he was not the same player. And then he went down with a knee injury to end the season. So it was a wash. And it was not a reflection of his ability to score touchdowns. But we know this year, fully healthy, participating even in the offseason work. Many starters are not playing at this time of year, but in the 49ers camp, McCaffrey is participating. So he's healthy. He is going to be the engine of this offense. 49ers have an extremely soft schedule this year. They should be able to play with leads. That means McCaffrey leaning on the run game more. They'll have to pass as well in the tougher games. There aren't many tough games on the schedule. They don't play any of the real powerhouses in the AFC. Their NFC schedule, the Rams and the Buccaneers, I think are their toughest games there. So McCaffrey's going to have his opportunities. Now, McCaffrey could hit this 7 touchdowns he needs. You could do that in 8 games with the schedule. That mitigates a lot of the injury risk if that's what you're worried about. But remember, in the last 3 years, let's take the short range. McCaffrey's played every game in 2 of the last 3 years. So last year, it was, in my mind, it was a non-football injury. I think this is one of the greatest bets on the board, and I love that. But anyway, in addition to this picks tool that you're seeing right now, RotoWire has updated our website and our app. It's the most exciting news I've had during my 9 years at RotoWire. I am so happy to be a part of it. If you're watching this live or if you're listening on Monday, July 7th, today's the last day of our once-in-a-lifetime deal. You go to RotoWire.com, you pick any subscription. If you use the code PURPLE, you get 25% off. Again, code PURPLE at checkout, 25% of it. Today, July 7th is the last day. If you see this show after July 7th, you could use the code YouTube15 for 15% off subscriptions. All right, we'll take that off the screen. But again, Picks tool, you are going to love it. All right, today we are talking some ADP battles. Our first battle is 3 running backs who are going in the first round, and I'll explain why I include the third player in a moment. Jahmyr Gibbs, Ashton, Jeanty, and I put Christian McCaffrey in this group. Now, ADP-wise, you'll realize Jahmyr Gibbs in some drafts is going as early as pick 2. So there's definitely that going on. Welcome, Pete. See you're in the house. So we have Gibbs. Again, he'll often go number 2 now. I've seen it. I saw it in draft. I had high-stakes draft last week. Ashton, Jeanty, often a top 5 or 6 pick. And then Christian McCaffrey. It all depends. If you're playing in a tournament, people will take him right with this group of running backs. Maybe in redraft league, just 1 12-team league, people might not feel the need to take the injury risk and they wait on him. But I still think if you're playing in a really competitive league, and we'll talk about each player, McCaffrey fits in this equation. So let's start out with Jahmyr Gibbs. And the ADP on Gibbs is technically running back 3. Again, I've seen him go before that, but that's kind of where it sits. And we know last year, Gibbs had 1,929 scrimmage yards and 20 overall touchdowns, 88th percentile broken tackle rate, 65th percentile yards after contact. You don't need me to tell you this. This is an elite football player. Here's where we need to think about it. The upside, of course, the 4 games David Montgomery missed, Gibbs was averaging 33 PPR points. That's insane. Nobody gets that level of scoring, yet Jahmyr Gibbs did. And so that's what we want to see. And in those games, he averaged 155 scrimmage yards and 2 touchdowns. So that is the upside, that he has a similar role this year. But the problem is David Montgomery, because Montgomery obviously missed those 4 games, and Gibbs only topped 105 rushing yards. It was like a couple times when the games Montgomery missed. It was very seldom. He was very rarely over that. And remember the 33 points PPR per game that we said Gibbs scored with no Montgomery? Well, in the 13 games with Montgomery, it was 18.3 PPR points. So like a little more than half. And 18.3 PPR per game is good. It's very good. But that doesn't put him in the stratosphere necessarily that is going to be ahead of Bijan Robinson or Saquon Barkley, who aren't in this ADP battle. But their Ashton Jeanty might be able to score that. And we'll talk about Christian McCaffrey. If he's healthy, he's definitely scoring that. So that's where you need to begin to think. So the question becomes, what is Gibbs's role this year? And that's the big question. The fantasy community wants to say, well, hey, the genie's out of the bottle. Gibbs has to play because the team saw they are super insanely productive with him on the field. And I get it. But remember, David Montgomery signed a contract extension. He's really important to this team. And I will say this, I believe he's the heart and soul of the offense. And I believe he is such a part of the culture of that team. And he's a very good player. And I think they feel having the 1-2 punch, Sonic and Knuckles, they call themselves, right? I think that is a thing. And I think the team does not want to put that genie back in the bottle. Now, a few more things you need to consider here. The interior offensive line for Detroit. It's a work in progress, to say the best. Center Frank Ragnow retired. They will go with 6th-round pick. Last name's Mahogany. I forgot his first name. Sorry. One of the guard spots. They have a 2nd-round guard. And again, these pick 2nd-round guards don't always pan out. That's the interior line. And so the running game could face some issues there. Now, the tackles are elite. We know that, so no issue there. So I just think we need to understand the offensive line is going to take a hit. Montgomery should be involved. So when you're picking Jahmyr Gibbs, if you believe that he has distanced himself so far from Montgomery that Montgomery is a smaller factor, but instead of a 1A, 1B, Montgomery's a clear number 2. I think you can make that case for taking Gibbs right with Barkley and Bijan Robinson. But if this is closer to last year's split, then I think that Gibbs's ceiling is completely neutered. Occasional games, of course, will have spike games, but you got to be careful about it because it's not a slam dunk that he is going to have anything close to the last 4 weeks of last year. And that's what we remember as fantasy managers. We remember he shattered leagues. All right, that's the take on him. Where do I stand on this? So very simple. I have Gibbs firmly ranked as my running back 3. I think the floor is solid enough. I think the ceiling is a work in progress unless Montgomery misses time. But I'm happy with him there because I know he's going to be involved. And I really believe the Lions defense is going to be more like the first 6 or 7 weeks last year when they were a top 6 defense before they had those 18 season-ending injuries and they had to throw the ball. The formula for this team was use their running backs. So I think the volume on the ground for both running backs goes up. So I do like him at running back 3. If I'm in a tournament, we'll talk later. I mean, he does have that tournament winning upside, but in a standard 12-team league, Gibbs is solider. Now, Ashton Jeanty of the Las Vegas Raiders is next. And this was interesting on June 20th. This is a while back, but OTAs are kind of over. The Athletics' Tashawn Reed believes running back Raheem Mostert will be the primary third down back. Now, do we believe beat writers? Maybe, maybe not. Some are dialed in really well. Some are just kind of putting some thoughts out there. Maybe they saw, some practice reps. So we got to be careful with that. And remember, Mostert's like 33 years old, and he looked to be in steep decline last year. So take that for what it's worth, but it's news and you need to know that because you can't be fully prepared for your draft unless you are cognizant of the latest news. Now, of course, in college, Jeanty was a monster, 2,600 scrimmage yards, 29 touchdowns, 7 yards per carry. As a runner, the agility, the start and stop, the change of direction, incredible 3-down skill set. The Raiders do have an adequate offensive line. We like that Pete Carroll, head coach, Chip Kelly, offensive coordinator. We love that they want to feature the run game. That's the nature of Pete Carroll to want to do that. So we are projecting a lot of touches for Jeanty. And again, with a decent offensive line and Geno Smith at quarterback, at least it's a threat that they can throw. So it's not like the Aiden O'Connell days where it's like, all right, just sell everything out and smash the run game. They have to be at least aware of the fact that Geno Smith can do some damage. So I think that helps. I think the other thing we have to think about is game script, though. And if the Raiders defense, I don't expect it to be very good. They have lost people over the years. They still have Max Crosby, but overall, this is a unit that's going to give up a lot of points. Obviously, I think game script, they're going to trail many, many weeks. And then the question becomes, how soon do they have to abandon the run game? And then the next question is, Brock Bowers, short area, intermediate area of the field pass catcher. Jacoby Myers, short and intermediate area pass catcher. Well, what does the running back catch the ball? Short, maybe intermediate area, but usually short area. So the late Mike Tagliere would often say, and correctly, that running back and tight end targets are often correlated. Well, Brock Bowers seeing his 150 targets, that's a problem for the running back. So I think that Geno Smith has been around a long time. He might not be a great quarterback, but do you take the 1 yard dump to Jeanty, or do you throw it 5 yards down the field to Brock Bowers? And my guess is, well, you're closer to moving the chains by throwing it to Brock Bowers. So, and then the Mostert factor, if he is involved at all as a pass catcher, if they're trailing, it could be a problem. Now, I'm not going to put a lot of stock in the Mostert thing, okay? Like I said, he looked washed last year, and I can't see him getting better this year. So I don't think it's a major factor. I just think it's something to keep in the back pocket, even if it's 5 games where Mostert's healthy, and if he is decent as a receiving back, that takes away that opportunity from Jeanty. So I think there's more risk than we believe here, again, especially with Bowers and Myers in the short area of the field. So I think that we are going to see a great deal of touches out of Jeanty, but people that are talking 330 in terms of touches, it might not happen. And a lot of teams are averse to overworking their running back. And it may be the case in Las Vegas. They may take more, and then Pete Carroll's old, I get it, but they might take more of a long angle here. Why do we want to wear out our running back if we're, going to be a 4-13 team or a 5-12 team? If we're falling behind, why overwork him and, bash his body in when he has a long career ahead of him? That could factor in. So we'll see how that shakes out. Overall, Jeanty at running back 4. Look, the cost is fair. I can't argue it, but I'm not shopping there. And it's not because he's never played an NFL game. I just think this Raiders situation is not conducive to a bell cow running back seeing the level of work, because the defense is going, in my mind, to be a big problem. And then that brings us to Christian McCaffrey, the third running back I grouped here. And again, like I said, if you're in a tournament, you definitely want to consider McCaffrey here. 12-team league, you'll listen to my discussion with this, and then you'll kind of you already made your decision, but you'll make your best decision here. So McCaffrey, ADP running back 5. Now, remember, last year, 9 missed games with an Achilles. Then he hurt his knee in week 13. It was a lost season. In my mind, from what I seem to hear, the Achilles did not seem to be a football injury. It seemed to be maybe a training issue, and that has not been McCaffrey's career. He has not had issues with training. So I think last year, we take the last 3 years, and we say, in the last 3 years, in 2 of those years, McCaffrey's played every game, and he has played at the highest of levels. Now, you could take the long range and say in the last 5 years, McCaffrey's missed at least half a season in 3 of those 5 years. And those are both valid points to take. You could cherry pick the short years, or you could take the longer ones, and then you're adding risk. Here's my take on this. McCaffrey was actually practicing during the offseason practices. A player of his stature does not need to do that, yet the team had him out there. They've made it very clear they are not backing off of the usage of Christian McCaffrey. What you saw last year when he played those few games and he did very little, it was very clear he was not ready to play football. He rushed back for his team. He did not look like himself. Believe me, Christian McCaffrey did not lose his talent. It was an injury. And so now we have to look at what we're going to see in terms of his career. Because of the injuries, he's only averaging 168 rushing attempts per year. So the wear and tear has not been bad. Now, I know he's caught a ton of passes, but those are different hitters often, and different angles. So the wear and tear hits are really the carries. And McCaffrey, in the last 4 full seasons he's played, he's either been the overall running back 1 or the overall running back 2. Nobody has that resume. McCaffrey's going to be 29 this year. Again, fully healthy. In some ways, last year, it was a year he fought the injuries, but it wasn't wear and tear on his body. So the potential with a healthy McCaffrey is that he's also a fresh McCaffrey. And the 49ers, again, as a receiver, as a runner, he's gold. And I think you could take down a tournament by going after Christian McCaffrey as the 3rd running back. So that kind of is my take on it. If I'm in a regular 12-team league, it's Jahmyr Gibbs. He's my pick there because I think, the youth, the potential to stay healthier would be in his favor. Any injury could happen to any player. We get that. But I like the younger player for that. So I think he's the safest pick there. But if I'm in a tournament, it's McCaffrey. Jeanty, it's only if I'm diversifying with a bunch of teams. So if I'm diversifying and I have a lot of picks in this range in a draft, I will want some exposure to Jeanty because it is in the realm that we have this type of workload. A Circa Million and Circa Survivor are back with a massive $21 million in guaranteed prizes. Circa Million, you pick 5 games against the spread each week, 18 weeks of action with 126 ways to win. $1 million for the winner and $6 million overall guaranteed. Circa Survivor, 1 pick a week, no point spread, lasts the longest to win it all, at least $15 million guaranteed. Enter in Nevada, play from anywhere. $21 million overall guaranteed. You visit circasports.com for all the details. All right, our next ADP battle, we are going to go to the quarterback position. We are going to go Jayden Daniels versus Jalen Hurts versus Joe Burrow. Now, when we look at this ADP battle, we have to frame this one out. Jayden Daniels, what a rookie season he had. 3,500 plus passing yards, 25 touchdowns, ran for 891 and 6 more touchdowns on the ground, over 50 rushing yards in at least 8 games. That was an amazing rookie year. And Washington, what do they do in the offseason? Well, they draft a tackle. They bring in Laramie Tunsil for the other tackle. They bring in Deebo Samuel. They did all the right things. We could see Jayden Daniels have another incredible season. His ADP at quarterback 3, very well justified. When you're running for 891 yards, you are worth that pick. Deep ball accuracy was exceptional last year. Now, what's the downside? There are 2 things I want you to think about. First one, again, 6'4", 210 pounds, a super slight frame. Got away with it last year. He had that one game against Carolina where he had a rib injury, missed the remainder of that game, but then he came right back the next week. So his toughness was definitely documented. Came back for that Bears game, that Hail Mary game that he won. But he was healthy. But at 6'4", 210 and exposing himself to the number of hits he has in the pocket as a runner, it's a tightrope because that body frame is going to struggle to hold up even against defense with lighter players than ever. It is a slight frame. So there is a big injury risk in my mind. Last year he played, but there is a big injury risk as far as I see it. And you need to be careful. So what I'm saying is this, if you're going to draft Daniels, I think normally I don't want to draft a second quarterback if I'm drafting a top 4 or 5 quarterback because I got draft capital there. But I think I want to circle back as soon as the top 12 quarterbacks are gone, I want to make it a priority to add another quarterback. Now you can wait late. CJ Stroud is off in quarterback 20. If Dak Prescott often falls outside of quarterback 12, if you're willing to go that deep, fine. But I think you would be wise to hedge. But otherwise, if you know your league, there might be streamable quarterbacks. So understand your league. But if, like a lot of leagues I play in, they're highly competitive, team, they'll just snap up a second quarterback in a one quarterback league. It's just been a trend of things. So that's like the plus and the minus on Jayden Daniels. There's not much more to say. Really, there was one other thing. The other potential for regression, even though they brought in tackles, they brought in Debo. Here's the one thing I need you to think about. The first time they played the Eagles last year, that offense was largely shut down. Now, that second game against the Eagles, that's when Jalen Hurts got the concussion and the game went off the rails and it became a crazy shootout. Daniels did it. Give him credit. But then in that playoff game when they met again, the Eagles largely had his number. Pittsburgh, there was film out on Daniels for that one. Pittsburgh, came out defensively and they largely slowed Daniels down. It was a struggle. And now not every defense is Philly and not every defense is Pittsburgh. But I think in the offseason, there is at least somewhat of a book out. Now, maybe the tackles and Samuel are enough to overcome that. But I do think we could see second-year regression. Remember, Washington had a pretty easy schedule last year. They project to have one of the more difficult schedules this year. So there is a little bit of baked-in risk there. And again, that's why I like taking a second quarterback to hedge on Daniels. You got league-winning upside. But I think the risk merits taking a second quarterback, even if you typically wouldn't. Jalen Hurts is next, and the best news for him, obviously, is that the tush push was not banned. So it's still there, and so we could get those big rushing touchdowns. Those are still on the floor at the table. The floor is still high, still on the table. And Hurts is going as the quarterback 4 in most drafts, and last year, we saw it was his lowest passing output since becoming a starter. He dropped nearly 800 yards from his norms. The rushing was elite, but again, the rushing yardage, it's been down 21, 22. Those years, the rushing numbers were in the 700s. Now they're depressed a little bit. He's not running quite to that same level. But again, he had 7 games over 25 fantasy points last year. Durability's been pretty good. Missed 2 games in 3 of the last 4 seasons. I knew there was a concussion in there, but mostly durable for the mobile quarterback that he is. And we know there's talk. Kevin Patullo, the new offensive coordinator, they're going to throw. All right, whatever. If Vic Fangio's defense is playing their game, the Eagles are going to likely have a dominant offensive line, and they have Saquon Barkley. Odds are, from an organizational standpoint, you'd be kind of silly to throw the ball all over the yard because your goal is winning games. Your goal is getting the home field advantage. And Jalen Hurts can be a very good passer. And he has A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and when healthy, Dallas Goedert. But I still think that formula from last year, I don't see Nick Sirianni saying, all right, Kevin Patullo, go ahead and change it all up. It's a really tough sell. There's no reason for them to change it. So I do worry the passing attempts are going to be low, but you're drafting Hurts for rushing and touchdowns. And we saw last year he had the games. Now, can Saquon Barkley get more of those? I can't quantify it. So I can't really say that's going to happen. And I think that Hurts gives you a really good weekly floor. And if there are games the Eagles trail, they certainly can make things happen through the air. So I think that basically Hurts is a very safe quarterback 4. It's difficult to go wrong with him there. But before we get to Joe Burrow, the NFFC RotoWire Fantasy Football Online Championship is live. You play fantasy football against your favorite RotoWire experts on the NFFC this football season. Yeah, Jeff Erickson, Nick Whalen, myself, many more. Alan Seslowsky will be in there. I'm sure Joe Bartle will be. We'll compete in the RotoWire NFFC Online Championship for a shot at $250,000. You sign up for a draft today, rotowire.com/high stakes. That's rotowire.com/high stakes. All right, let's get to the third quarterback in our ADP battle, and it's Joe Burrow, ADP of quarterback 5. So we already went over Jayden Daniels and Jalen Hurts, very mobile quarterbacks. Obviously, again, Hurts is heavily touchdown. Jayden Daniels is heavily yardage based. Joe Burrow, the passer, he's only gonna run for about 200 yards, so that's a non-starter. But last year, we saw Burrow really get things rolling. career high, 4,918 yards, 43 touchdowns. With defenses focused on the pass, Burrow completed 70% of his passes. 7 times Burrow went over 300 yards. In 3 of those 7 games, it was 392 or more. So the yardage numbers were just piling up. In his healthy seasons, Burrow's thrown at least 34 touchdowns in each of them. And last year, we saw at the end of the season, this team realized we have to win through the air. And I expect this year to be the same. There are so many questions on defense. They got rid of defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. Why? Because you can't fire 11 defensive players. I imagine Trey Hendrickson will be back at some point. We'll see how that shakes out. But even if he's not, I still think this defense has a lot of issues. They are going to give up points. And I think the Bengals are going to have to score really one of the highest point totals in NFL history to have a shot at making the playoffs. But if any team can do it, now they're going to need T. Higgins to stay at some level of health. And of course, Jahmyr Chase has been mostly healthy. He had 1 year with 12 games. But I think that said, Chase Brown as a relief valve, maybe Mike Gesicki gets a little more involved. Now there's a couple maybes in there. The Higgins thing, I think that does hurt. If Higgins misses significant time, it's been 5 games each of the last 2 years. The defense can put even more attention on Jahmyr Chase. Not that Chase can't do it anyway, but that complicates it. And then, I think that's the big one. The Higgins is the big one. If Higgins misses time, it's a problem. And if Gesicki isn't more utilized as a receiver, they need to make Gesicki their slot receiver. Even if it's as a tight end, because in the games they used him, it really helped the offense. But then there were games he just disappeared. So I think those 2 things need to happen for Burrow to hit his upside. So I think right now, when I'm making these picks, like I said, Daniels is the win your league pick, but hedge him. Hurts is the very safe player who I don't need to hedge. Burrow is properly priced at quarterback 5. Because I think for you to make a case for him to get to quarterback 3, you have to bet on Higgins' health and the usage on a more consistent base of Mike Gesicki. And I think those are 2 ifs that we're not going to get answered. So I think Burrow is perfectly priced at ADP of quarterback 5. If you want to bet on health of Higgins, because people are drafting Higgins as the wide receiver 12, which to me, that's another story for another day. I've talked about him off season, but you're betting on health. And if you're doing that, then that makes perfect sense to me. All right. We will go over more ADP battles after we take a short break. All right. ADP battle number 3. We have a wide receiver battle here. We have Puka Nacua. We have Amon-Ra St. Brown, and we have Brian Thomas Jr. These are the wide receivers 5, 6, and 7 in drafts. All right, start with Puka Nacua. Now, Puka Nacua, last year, he missed about 2 months with a knee injury. His rookie year, he played every game. So 1 out of 2 years, missed significant time. The injury last year, I was out on Nacua last year. And I think people think I'm a Nacua hater, but I'm really not. What we've seen is what we've seen. Beautiful player. But what I saw was, in that first year, even though he played every game, I noticed that McVay makes his receivers block often. Cooper Kupp had to block. Nacua needed to block. Now, back in the day, Odell Beckham didn't have to block, and I don't think of Devontae Adams be asked to block, but Nacua is very good at it. But that's the problem. These are violent blocks in the 3 to 5 yard area past the line of scrimmage. So Nacua is frequently taking big collisions with linebackers. Again, these aren't the 250-pound linebackers of years ago. These are like 230-pound guys, but this is like most plays, then they want to run the ball. Nacua is taking collision after collision. And then as a receiver, very physical style. And when you watch these games, how often do you see Nacua helped off the field, limping to the sideline? He comes back. But at some point, my concern last year was, this is going to add up. The physical style is going to take a toll. He's putting himself in harm's way too often. Now, whether the knee injury last year of the 2-month miss time had to do with that, maybe not. But I just think that drafting Nacua this high, you're betting on health, which may happen. It's a fair bet to say, okay, well, I'm going to bet this player makes it through the season, and it's good. I just think, again, the play style is going to always be a problem. Now, the usage was incredible for Nacua last year. He had at least 95 yards in 7 of the last 10 games, 89th percentile yards after the catch. Credit to him and to Sean McVay for always scheming him out into space. The target share, we saw in those late season games. I remember noting this on some of my shows that we saw Stafford targeting Nacua on over 46 of Stafford's attempts. It was a stretch of about 5 games down the stretch. That was one of the highest levels ever. And Stafford was only throwing 23, 25 passes, but it was 12 were going to Nacua. It was incredible. Now, this team likes to run a balanced offense. We know that already. We know that Sean McVay wants to run the ball. They want to pass. They want to just keep it balanced. They have Kyron Williams. They draft Jarquez Hunter. Last year, Blake Corum. So we know they're set up to run the ball as well. Enter Davante Adams. Now, Nacua is a clear number 1. We're not going to question that for a minute. But to think Davante Adams isn't coming in and taking significant target share, I think that would be misguided. You don't bring him in, with the expectation, well, you're just going to see an occasional target here and there. I don't think that fits Davante Adams' mindset. And I imagine Sean McVay talked to Adams before the acquisition. So I have to think that's there. So I think some of the target share goes away. Nacua will still be very productive on whatever targets he gets because he is that good of a player. So that's my case on him. If you're betting on health and that Adams is take too many targets, very, very defensible pick at the ADP of wide receiver 5. Amon-Ra St. Brown is next, going as the wide receiver 6. Now, St. Brown, 2 years ago, if you invested in St. Brown, you hit the jackpot because he was going maybe wide receiver 8 to 10, if I remember correctly, in 2023. And obviously, he had a 1,500 plus yard season, double digit touchdowns. It was amazing. And then, last year, we paid the price for that. His ADP went as high as it could. Maybe wide receiver 4 in some drafts. And then I was always concerned about 2023 being a career year. Now, last year, down to 1,263. So a great season, 12 touchdowns. So that's great, 115 catches. So his 27% target share, that's a real thing. So St. Brown was a very good draft pick. He just wasn't the same player, though. Yards after the catch were really good in 2023. He went down to 39th percentile last year. The explosive plays, and this is part of that, they started drying up. In 2023, and he had about the same amount of catches. It was the same amount of catches each year. It was a 4 difference. So he had 24 catches of over 20 yards in 2023. That went down by 10 down. So only 14 catches of 20 plus last year. And remember 2 years ago, he had 1 game under 70 yards. It was a 49-yard game. Last year, he was under 50 yards 5 times. And I want to say he had 2 games under 13 yards as well. So it was basically a much more volatile Amon-Ra St. Brown. And a lot of that had to do with when Detroit's defense was healthy earlier in the season. Their goal was to run and play defense, and Goff was throwing 25 times or fewer in a lot of those games. So a lot of that had to do with the pass volume drying up. Now, St. Brown was still the clear number 1 there, but there's concern there. And at the wide receiver 6, I think we're still kind of betting in him going back to that level of production or close to it that we saw 2 years ago. Whereas I think what we saw last year is kind of his new normal. I think we're going to see 11 or 1,200 yards. We're going to see 8 to 10 touchdowns. And that's a good set of numbers. I just don't think that we're at wide receiver 6. I don't think we're getting the upside potential that we need. And I think it's going to be a big difference for Jared Goff to have pretty much a new interior offensive line, no Ben Johnson. And Ben Johnson really kept Goff clean frequently, set up sequencing of plays well. I think this all kind of works to the worse. So, and St. Brown, look, you're going to have a floor. You're going to have a good floor. But at wide receiver 6, I think I'm kind of leaning away from him. And then that brings me to Brian Thomas Jr. Wow, what a finish this season for Brian Thomas Jr., right? Going up the board now is the wide receiver 7 in average drafts. He had 1,282 yards, 10 touchdowns. And here's all I need you to know. We don't question that Brian Thomas has superstar talent. He's going to be a fixture in this league probably for a long, long time. But I still have to question one thing. Trevor Lawrence. Brian Thomas played 11 games with Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence never targeted more than 9 times in a game. And my question is why? Trevor Lawrence is not a good decision maker. If Trevor Lawrence looks and he doesn't like the way the play looks, he won't like go to his alpha necessarily. He'll check down to something else. And then it's often a bad decision too. And we also need to know that Brian Thomas Jr. in those 11 games at Lawrence averaged 13 PPR points and 5.7 targets per game. Okay, numbers. Mac Jones comes in. Now, the people want to make the best case for Thomas are going to say, well, Thomas figured it all out as soon as Mac Jones came in. It just happened to be perfect timing. He figured it out in from weeks 12 or 13 on, and he became a superstar. And that might be the case. But he was making superstar plays when Trevor Lawrence was there. He just wasn't getting the ball enough. Again, I believe it's because of his quarterback. It wasn't because of play calling. Well, Mac Jones had nothing to lose. Mac Jones obviously is a career backup, right? And when Mac Jones worked with Brian Thomas, well, he just slung it. And Brian Thomas, remember I told you that 5.7 targets per game for Thomas with Lawrence? Mac Jones, it was 10 to 14 targets every single game. Mac Jones got it. Again, I'm not saying he's a good quarterback. I'm saying he understood this is what I have to do. And you know what? Don't discount the fact that maybe Mac Jones, although very limited, was a better decision maker than Trevor Lawrence. Well, I'm throwing the ball to my alpha. I'm not going to check down to somebody else, take my shot. Well, that 13 PPR points per game that we got between Brian Thomas and when Trevor Lawrence was in, that 13 points went to 22.9, so a 10-point hike. Those 5.7 targets under Lawrence went to 11.7 with Brian Thomas. I want you to understand this. If you're drafting Brian Thomas, you are saying Liam Cohen will figure out Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence will now make good decisions. Trevor Lawrence will aggressively throw to Thomas downfield, and it's going to pick up right where Mac Jones left off. If you believe that, draft Brian Thomas all day long. And it's a fair belief. However, if you believe that what we saw between Lawrence and Thomas is not going to be what Mac Jones and Thomas did, then ADP 7 is going to be a stretch. Now, I'm not saying Brian Thomas will be a bust, but what I'm saying is this. I don't trust Trevor Lawrence. Very little trust. And I know he's had bad coaching. And I know he's had bad offensive lines. The line's not much better this year. And I get all that. But the decision-making, that one's a problem. And so I think Brian Thomas is probably more the wide receiver 10, which means at ADP of wide receiver 7, that puts me out on him. Again, I'm not predicting a bust season. But when you're 3 spots below ADP, potentially, it's a problem. Like I said, buy into him if you believe that Trevor Lawrence will be fixed. But if not, be very careful. Of these 3, honestly, I am not aggressively targeting any of them. If I want the best floor play out of the group, I am going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown because he's been there, done that with the floor. If I want the highest ceiling potential, now I get close between Nacua and Brian Thomas Jr., to which point, if I want to bet that Nacua has a healthy season, Nacua beats them all. So if you want to bet on health, go Nacua. But if you're worried about his physical play style, eventually continuing to catch up as you did a little bit last year, then you go Brian Thomas Jr. So again, I will tell you in another ADP, I'll tell you right now, I prefer Drake London over all 3 of these, and Drake London is cheaper. So I will make Drake London a part of my draft plan, depending what my draft spot is, but I like him better than all 3, and there will be shows I talk about him. I have plenty of videos and articles out on him already, but this show isn't about Drake London. But hey, is there something you wish your fantasy league had or features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules for playoffs, deeper team settings? Look no further because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry. They offer the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Fantrax even offers college football fantasy leagues. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league, invite your friends, and dominate your drafts this season. Fantrax is the top fantasy football platform in the industry. Fantrax is running a special promotion you don't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire today to enter for your chance to win a signed Jahmyr Chase jersey. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing league for more chances to win. Again, simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. All right, we have one ADP battle left for you. It's a tight end battle. It's George Kittle and Sam LaPorta. Now, I understand in drafts, Kittle's the clear number 3, LaPorta's the clear number 4. But I know there are people that are still thinking and remembering Hey, wait a minute. Wasn't it like less than 24 months ago that Sam LaPorta was the overall tight end one? People remember that. Of course you should. And you should. That season happened. And George Kittle has had a couple great seasons in a row. And so let's talk about these two players because I think there's a decision to be made. And for some of you, that decision may simply be, do I wait till tight end 4 and take LaPorta, or do I aggressively target Kittle at tight end 3? Because if you want an early tight end and you're not drafting the draft capital to get Bowers or McBride, this becomes your decision. So I don't think these two players are necessarily interconnected in both. They're both going to be considered the 3. Kittle's been the clear number 3. All right, so let's talk about Kittle first. Kittle had 1,106 yards and 8 touchdowns on only 94 targets. And that's the thing. Kittle gets between 84 and 95 targets, right? He's always right in that range. But Kittle does so well with his targets. His average depth of target as a tight end, amazing, 84th percentile. And then so when you get high depth of target, normally that means not much after the catch. Well, Kittle is the major exception to the rule. So I said 84th percentile depth of target and 88th percentile after the catch. As you know, he is the man when it comes to creating plays on limited opportunities. Again, he hasn't topped 94 targets in the last 4 years. The system caps his target volume. Now, Brandon Ayuk is likely to start the season on the PUP list after suffering the knee injury last year. He's likely to miss at least 4 games. We could see a little more Kittle in the short term. Also, Kittle had that reputation of being a brittle player early in his career. Now, he played through a lot of stuff. So, I mean, if you called him brittle, it's because you were a fantasy person and you were like, well, you missed too many games. But in the last 3 years, his missed games 2, 1, and 2. You can live with that, right? And I think back, at least one of those games was rest. When they didn't need him on the field. I think last year they sat most of their starters, even though they were eliminated from playoffs. They pretty much sat. So some of those absences were not even him like missing games. So anyway, Kittle's been mostly healthy. And in this offense, so there's 2 ways to look at it. They are going to have to score a lot of points, the 49ers, because that defense keeps losing infrastructure. Yeah, they drafted people, but they've lost some really key components year after year, and it's catching up with them. So they're going to have to score, but their schedule is extremely easy. I talked about this with McCaffrey earlier in the ADP battles that, remember, the AFC, I think the Texans are the toughest game they have, and maybe the Jaguars, those are the toughest games. They don't play any of like the elite contenders in the AFC. That helps. And in the NFC, the Buccaneers and the Rams, I believe they're toughest draws. So the schedule is very favorable, which means even with a rougher defense, for the 49ers, they may not have to go crazy through the air, but again, they throw enough, and Kittle's going to get targets. Now, the other thing about Kittle in his past was we always worried about volatility. Well, he gets there at the end of the season, but man, it's a roller coaster ride. We got 2 points this week and 21 next. Well, that wasn't last year. George Kittle was dominant like week to week. He only had a couple of bad games, and one of those games was the snowstorm in Buffalo on that Sunday night, I believe, week 12. Otherwise, Kittle was putting up a high floor every single week. And, Deebo Samuel's gone. Again, Ayuk, we don't know when we're going to get him. I think Kittle is more solidified than ever at this draft pick. He's never going to see the volume to compete with your Brock Bowers and your Trey McBrides. So that's all it is, just a volume issue. When you have 2 guys getting 150 targets and you get Kittle getting 94, yeah, you're not going to compete with that. But I think Kittle is proving now as he ages. He's 31 this year. But again, tight ends seem to age a little better than wide receivers, and I don't see any sign of drop off. So Kittle, great choice there. And then there's Sam LaPorta. And Sam LaPorta ended last season, and we were happy at the end of the season. He averaged 50 yards, almost 2/3 of a touchdown from like week 8 on last year, averaged 13.2 PPR points from week 8 on. We were happy with that. But I need you to understand this about Sam LaPorta. I was out on Sam LaPorta last year. And those that listen, remember when I told you this, I said, the defense is going to be good. They're going to run the ball, and they're going to limit Goff's passing volume. It's exactly what happened through 7 weeks. And if you remember, if you rostered Sam LaPorta last year, you remember through week 7, Sam LaPorta averaged 2.8 targets and 7 PPR points per game. He was considered a universal bust. And then the Lions continue to lose more and more defensive players. And the more defensive players they lost, instead of Goff throwing 25 times a game, it was up to 35 and 40. And of course, everybody's eating when you're throwing 35 to 40 times a game. Well, now we come into this year. Lions have most of their people back healthy. Those 2 young corners they drafted last year, they are now another year of experience. Those safeties are amazing. Aiden Hutchinson is crazy good. So that defense is probably going to be a thing again this year. And I know the Lions have a brutal schedule. I get it. But I worry that with Ben Johnson gone and a new interior offensive line, 6th-round Mahogany played some last year. But again, am I banking on a 6th-round guard? Probably not. Bringing Graham Glasgow at center to take over for Frank Ragnow. Not excited about that. Ragnow was pretty elite. So that was it. So LaPorta, I expect the defense to be good. I expect the running game, even despite the offensive line thing, to figure out a way. And I think it's a low volume passing game. So I think we're going to see that LaPorta we saw in weeks 1 through 7 last year. And it's not exactly what we have, a working framework here. So that said, see Charlene's in the house. Welcome. Anybody has questions? I know I had a couple questions in the chat during this. If you can message me, if you use the X at Jim Coventry NFL, I'm happy to answer them there. But on the podcast, we'll have to finish this out right now. So again, LaPorta, I will be very careful drafting. I'm not targeting him because I think the targets are going to be where they were weeks 1 through 7. So I'm out on him there. But Kittle, like I said, if you're willing to take the lower targets, I think he is a wonderful pick as a tight end 3. Hey, thanks to our sponsor, Circa Resort and Casino, and thanks to everyone for listening. Make sure you come back next week for another edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast.